Welcome to this webinar for the Soul Repair Center entitled Skills for Chaplains Walking Beside Personnel Whose Spiritual Practices Are Uniquely Personal. I'm Nancy Ramsay, Director of the Soul Repair the Soul Repair Center at Brite Divinity School on the campus of TCU in Fort Worth. The center provides resources for religious leaders and professional caregivers who support veterans and their families affected by moral injury. Our mission includes offering free monthly webinars September through May that focus on topics related to military moral injury, which have been inadequately covered or not yet addressed. We are grateful for the support of the Shea Center on Moral Injury, which co-sponsors these webinars. The Shea Center is directed by Dr. Rita Nakashima-Brock, a Senior Vice President for VOA and Founding Director of this center. Our March webinar features 2 skilled VA chaplains and a psychologist on the staff of the VA's Integrative Mental Health Program. They will provide guidance for effectively accompanying military personnel whose spirituality and related spiritual practices are highly personal, rather than reflecting beliefs and practices within historical religious traditions. The importance of these skills is an emerging reality for military chaplains and an important addition to current curricula and training for chaplains. Our panelists include VA chaplains Robin Booth, D-Min, and Rotunda East, D-Min, and psychologist Dr. Melissa Smigelsky, who serves on the staff of the Integrative Mental Health Program affiliated with Vanderbilt Divinity School. All serve on the board of the Soul Repair Center. Together, these panelists bring substantial experience in the important work of caring for persons affected by moral injury. Dr. Robin Booth D-Min is a chaplain and certified educator with the Association for Clinical Pastoral Education. He is the Director of Clinical Pastoral Education within the VA North Texas healthcare system. A native of Chicago, Illinois, he received a Bachelor of Art degree from the University of Georgia, a Master of Divinity degree from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary, and a Doctor of Ministry degree from Columbia Theological Seminary. He is an ordained minister with the Alliance of Baptist Churches, USA, and a board-certified chaplain with the National Association of Veteran Affairs Chaplains. Chaplain Booth served in numerous leadership positions within the ACPE organization, including regional and national certification chairperson. Robin is an instructor at the University of Texas Southwest Medical School, where he offers an elective course on spirituality and mental health. He serves as a coach with the Integrative Chaplaincy Training Program affiliated with the Doctor of Ministry program at Vanderbilt School of Theology. As a coach, he assists students to integrate evidence-based mental health practices with the provision of spiritual care. The teaching and provision of spiritual care is one of his passions, and he finds fulfillment in assisting others in learning the art of spiritual care. Dr. Rotunda East D-Min serves as Chief of Chaplains at the Providence VA Medical Center in Providence, Rhode Island. She is a board-certified clinical chaplain with a specialty in mental health through the National Association of VA Chaplains. Chaplain East retired from the United States Air Force after 21 years of active duty military service. Her shared experience alongside other members of a weapons intelligence team informs her daily ministry and service to veterans who suffer the lifelong effects of moral injury from having served their country. Her work is rooted in the concept of addressing moral injury from a lens of grief, loss, companionship, and community engagement. She holds a Master of Divinity degree in Pastoral Counseling and Chaplaincy from Denver Seminary and a Doctor of Ministry with a concentration in mental health and chaplaincy integration from Vanderbilt Divinity School. Chaplain East has co-authored several articles on moral injury and continues involvement in quality improvement studies that will produce evidence-based modalities within the VA healthcare system to address the importance of spirituality on mental health outcomes. Melissa Smigelsky, PhD, is a licensed clinical psychologist with Integrative Mental Health, a national program under the Office of Mental Health and Suicide Prevention in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Dr. Smigelsky facilitates an expanding network of VA chaplain mental health teams and individual providers that focus on the development, refinement, implementation, and dissemination of moral injury practices. She also developed a moral injury group curriculum that is being used at numerous sites across the VA. and she provides moral injury care to veterans within the Durham VA healthcare system. Her recent publications include Emerging Interventions for Moral Injury, Expanding Pathways to Moral Healing, Current Treatment Options in Psychiatry, 4 Components of Moral Injury Groups co-facilitated by mental health providers and chaplains, Spirituality in Clinical Practice, Patterns of Potential Moral Injury in Post-9/11 Combat Veterans and COVID-19 Healthcare Workers, and Let's Get Real, a collaborative group therapy for moral injury in the Journal of Healthcare Chaplaincy, and Dynamic Diffusion Network, advancing moral injury care and suicide prevention using an innovative model. Dr. Smigelsky completed her graduate training in clinical psychology at Wheaton College Graduate School and the University of Memphis. I want to remind us all that our webinars are posted as links on this site and at the VOA YouTube channel. Originally, the link is available at each site within 10 business days. At the Brite site, you will also find an index that facilitates research of the webinars we have offered over the past 3 years. The Reverend Kyle Fauntleroy, a Director of Development at Brite and a retired captain in the U.S. Navy chaplaincy, is serving as the chat monitor. Sam McAllister on the staff at Volunteers of America provides his production expertise for this webinar. This hour, we'll proceed with opening statements by each presenter, followed by shared conversation for the last 15 minutes. Then at the top of the next hour, we'll open the floor for your questions. Please post those questions in the chat where Kyle Fauntleroy will gather them and alert me to them. And now, let's move to our webinar.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for allowing us to be a part of this part of your day. Today, we're going to talk about a little bit about how chaplains come alongside veterans whose spirituality is very personal to them. We're going to begin by talking a little bit about the military culture. We do that because it's important not only for the service member serving, the veteran that has transitioned from serving to now veteran status, their family members, the civilian population, and chaplains themselves. It's important for us to understand how chaplains are embedded, and the spiritual support that we provide is so very important, whether you are a military chaplain or a VA chaplain. Next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to talk about the culture of 2 worlds, from civilian to warrior and back. It's important because at the very on-site, the very first day that a person comes into the military and goes to basic training or boot camp, one of the first people that they meet during that first week are chaplains. Why? Because it is so important with the transformation that's about to take place that you have some type of stability embedded in your training from the very beginning. Next slide. Military OneSource did a survey of service members when they first came into basic training, and they asked them about their spirituality or their religious beliefs. And in 2015, approximately 66% identified as having some kind of faith background or religious belief, or that they were spiritual. One of the comments that in that article that really caught me was one of the veterans said, "I was a Christian serving in the U.S. military, but I was not serving in a Christian military." Now, what did he mean by this? Some of the things that you are trained to do from the onset in basic training, you are trained to fight to win by any means necessary. So you go in with certain beliefs, certain core beliefs, certain religious beliefs. And that's not necessarily the beliefs of the military, because they have a mission. And that mission is not always pretty. It does not always align up with your core values, your core beliefs, your God of your youth. So this statement was very profound when I read it in that article. The Department of Defense recognizes 200 plus faith groups. The VA, 88 plus. No other discipline except the chaplains are going to have some type of basic understanding of all of these different faith beliefs and backgrounds. Your chaplain must know all of these, because as you go through that transformation throughout your military career and then becoming a veteran, you have to have someone there who understands what you've gone through, so that those personal spiritual beliefs, those practices that are personal and individual to you, someone can come alongside you and help you to sometimes verbalize those things that are very hard to put to words that you have experienced. Next slide. From basic training, the very day you are being transformed. It's a world that changes you mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. The person is transformed mind, body, soul, and spirit. Next slide. The mental transformation begins by stripping a person of their individuality. You go from being an individual to one team, one heart, one mind, one body, because that's how you have to function in order to survive in some of the places that you may be sent. Your thought process or your mindset must be one that will allow you to function with other individuals in such a way that you cannot tell one from the other. Not everyone makes it through this. Not everyone obtains that oneness that is needed to operate in such a way. When this mental oneness is not achieved, the result can sometimes be casualties. And that affects you religiously or spiritually. Next slide. The physical transformation that takes place is much like the mental one. It involves being stripped of, I can make it, to we can make it. When you are in a combat zone or training zone with bullets flying by, mortars coming in 3 at a time, you have to be physically fit. You want the person to your left or your right to be physically fit. So you work to do so mentally and physically, right there in basic training, because that's where it's going to prepare you for operational readiness. And a chaplain is embedded in this. A chaplain is embedded if you go off to war. So we have to understand these things. We have to understand each of these transformations so that we can come alongside the individual and help them through those things that they will carry long after this transformation takes place and they try to transform back into civilian world. Next slide. Another transformation comes emotionally. With basic training striving to strip you of your individuality, it also does so with your emotions. You turn those emotions off. You're told not to feel. Push through it in order to fight a war and do the things required of war. You are being prepared mentally and physically, but you must be able to do so without emotion, or at the very least, be able to control or suppress those emotions. And that lends to those beliefs being questioned that you went in with. Now, think about it. It's important for us to recognize what's going on with this transformation so far. We are taking individuals who might have certain beliefs, morals, and values and basically reprogramming them. And they don't even know that that's themselves when they look in the mirror. Next slide. Then comes the spiritual transformation. We think about all of the transformations up until now. Basic training, the things that we were exposed to and the things that changed for us while we were in basic sticks with us. And it's hard for us to reintegrate into society or to make a smooth transition from service member to veteran. That is why you have the chaplain embedded from the onset, and then you have the chaplain at the VA when they transition from service member to veteran status. It's important that the chaplain is there to bridge that gap, to be that constant, to be that one thing that they can hold on to that's stable when everything else seems foreign to them. Chaplains must understand this because we have to have the skills needed to meet the person where they are. We have to have the skills needed to walk alongside them, to know where they are, to go to those deep, dark places and address those invisible wounds. Next slide. When you look at VA chaplaincy and military chaplains, we function differently. And Chaplain Booth are going to tell us a little bit more about the skills required for the VA chaplain, which is very much different from the military chaplain. The military chaplain are considered religious leaders. They have confidentiality, yes. Their senior leadership is being advised on religious and spiritual matters. They talk to you about doctrines of faith. But the VA chaplain will begin to deal with that, a lot of that clinical and undiagnosed stuff that veterans have a hard time putting to words. We are the liaison for them when they are trying to explain what it is they're feeling, what it is they're suffering with, what it is they're dealing with. We are the ones who collaborate with the other providers on behalf, a lot of the times, of our veterans. Because we have that relationship that we can leverage because we've been there from day one. And we are here when they feel like it's over. So the skills needed for us to address all of this is a must, so that we can help the veteran tap into the God of their youth, or reach back and be that Christian that they felt like they once was, but they were not in a Christian environment or a Christian institution, or one that even thought about Christianity or any of the other religious beliefs, the 200 plus religious faith groups that the military recognizes. Next slide. At the VA, we have a directive, Directive 1111, and it talks about the spiritual care as a part of the treatment plan for our veterans. The VA takes this serious, and spiritual care must be included. If the veteran voluntarily consents, if the veteran feels that this is an important part of their care, it must be provided. And we saw the percentages of the veterans who consider themselves Christian or have some kind of belief. So if we take them and expose them to that, we've got to have something when they transition and trying to reintegrate into their community. and Directive 1111, which Chaplain Booth will talk about here in a few minutes, gives us our direction and how to do that. Next slide. It also talks about the preference of the veteran. It talks about chaplains being the subject matter expert. It talks about chaplains conducting those spiritual assessments, devising a spiritual plan of care. No one else can do that. We would not ask a doctor to, or you wouldn't ask me to assess someone for cancer or be a dermatologist or assess someone for any of the other ailments that they come to the hospital for. So why would we ask anyone else besides a chaplain to do a spiritual assessment? Someone who knows the different or the basics of all of the faith groups and an understanding of what spirituality is and what spirituality is not. Next slide. So as we transition to the skills that a chaplain should have, whether it be military or VA, keep in mind that your chaplains are those experts. They are the ones that the veterans and the service members go to when they have spiritual distress, when they have moral injury, and when they have spiritual injury that occurs from the day one of them going into basic training. So I'll turn it over to Chaplain Booth now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chaplain East, for such a comprehensive view of both the differences between the military and the VA. I'm going to be talking about education and educating our chaplains through clinical pastoral education and helping them to see the difference between spirituality and one's spiritual beliefs and one's religious beliefs. As you've noticed in the Directive 1111, there's no mention in there about religious care. It is all focused on spiritual care. So we're going to look at the differences between the two and how I go about educating students to understand the difference as they come in to the VA hospital and they are having to deal with people who have all sorts of religious beliefs as well as spiritual beliefs that don't necessarily fit into the category of religion. So let's go to the next slide. So as somebody comes in and applies to be a resident or a fellow or one of our chaplain students, I am very clear with them as they are beginning to apply or considering it, or they have submitted an application for our program, that in the VA, our chaplains do spiritual care, that we focus on the individual veteran and their life experience and how they make sense of their life experiences. And I also tell them that their spirituality is unique to them, unique to their story, and it is different than their religious care particularly, though they overlap, and we'll see that in just a few minutes. So let me give you some definitions of spirituality. Our first definition is a quality that goes beyond religious affiliation, that strives for inspiration, reverence, awe, meaning, and purpose, even in those who do not believe in God. The spiritual dimension tries to be in harmony with the universe, strives for answers about the infinite, and comes essentially into focus in times of emotional stress, physical and mental illness, loss, bereavement, and death. Another definition of spirituality is it refers to a broad set of principles that transcends all religions. Spirituality is about the relationship between ourselves and something larger. That something can be the good of the community or the people who we are serving or served by an agency or a school, or the energies greater than ourselves. Spirituality means being in right relationship with all that is. It is a stance of harmlessness towards all living beings and an understanding of their mutual interdependence. And so the ministry of a VA chaplain and the training of the VA chaplain is to understand the veteran and their worldview and their spiritual life, to explore how the veteran makes meaning out of life and their current circumstances, to reflect upon where they find peace, who and what supports them, and how they make use of the resources that they have to face the emotional, physical, or mental illness, loss, and bereavement, and ultimately death. This may include religious resources. And so let's take a look at that. Next slide, please. So you can see from the definitions here, a religious belief system is spiritual resources that many of us and many of our veterans make use of. Religion, as we state here in these four definitions, is a set of beliefs and practices related to the issue of what exists beyond the visible world, generally including the idea of the existence of a being, group of beings, an external principle, or a transcendent spiritual entity. It's an organized system of practices and beliefs in which people engage, a platform for the expression of their spirituality. It's a set of beliefs, practices, and language that characterizes a community that is searching for transcendent meaning in a particular way, generally based on the belief in a deity. An organized system of practices and beliefs in which people engage is a platform of expression of spirituality. So as I help students to engage with those in his, her, their care, to explore person's religious resources, I invite them to help individuals to look at, okay, how is their faith helping them as they face this illness, or as they face hospitalization, as they face death, as they face bereavement and the loss of a loved one? What meaning do they make out of this? And so the veterans often ask questions about why they are suffering. Oftentimes their faith tradition isn't congruent with what their life experiences are. And this creates a great deal of stress for them. I help students to develop ways in which to explore with the veteran questions of faith without the chaplain imposing his or her or their faith on that person. We are here to draw out how an individual is making use of their faith, or if it's not faith and religion, then how are they making use of their spirituality? Once again, we want to assist the veteran to use his or her, their resources, rather than imposing our resources on them. Now, this can be very challenging for some clergy persons due to the fact that their seminary training focuses their pastoral care on giving prescriptive answers to their congregants. Next slide, please. Our spirituality is made up of many influences and tributaries. At the core of our spirituality is an individual's core beliefs. These are personal belief systems that come from our inner personhood. They may be beliefs such as love for our families, love for humankind, doing good to others. Again, this is a core belief system in which the individual strive to live out throughout their lifetime. The concept of a loving God, of being in relationship with the divine, all of these beliefs are what the individual might hold on to, even when it's contradictory to their religious belief. Religion and religious beliefs assist us to live out our core beliefs. Religion offers us a community in which we can share our beliefs with others. We can find community support. Religion offers us a structure for our belief system and rituals and practices in which we can make use of spiritual resources on a daily basis. The individual may not believe everything that the religion holds to, but it offers enough structure to practice the core beliefs. Spirituality is an incorporation of our core beliefs and our religion or philosophy that goes beyond our religion. It incorporates all aspects of where we find inspiration that may or may not be within our religion. It is those concepts and experiences in which we find hope and connection, not only for our own religious belief system, but beyond them. It is a space in which we find a sense of peace, harmony, and interconnectedness with the divine and all humankind. As I teach these concepts, I invite students to look at their spirituality, not just their religion. We discuss how to assist veterans to explore their spirituality. For those who are not religious or are of a different religion than the chaplain student, we explore ways in which the chaplain can evoke the aspects of the veteran's spirituality out of their story and out of their narrative. I emphasize that it may not look or sound like religion or spirituality. The veteran may use different language that the chaplain than the chaplain does and seem very strange to the chaplain. In acceptance of the veteran's story, the chaplain has the responsibility to translate the veteran's use of language into the chaplain's understanding. Now, we do this in our heads, not out loud. The veteran may use different words for the divine. The veteran may have a different understanding of the afterlife or what it means to be human, but it is the responsibility of the chaplain to translate that into language that they have a better that the chaplain personally has a better understanding of. Next slide, please. So the care of a VA chaplain is to create a holding space in which they can share their story, their journey, their worldview. We do this through offering the veteran attention, acceptance, appreciation for where they are right now, affection for who they are, and allowing them to have the freedom to ask the difficult questions. The VA chaplain invites the veteran to have an experience of connection with the other, or as Walter Brueggemann uses the word, remembering. And he does use a hyphen between those words, primarily because he says the chaplain or the clergy person is an archetype in which many people have lots of respect and has a great deal of, allows a great deal of influence. And so Walter Brueggemann talks about us entering into a space in which they remember the community and that they are connected not only with others, with the chaplain, but with the divine as well. The chaplain also learns to assist veterans to explore his, her, or their spiritual resources. Where do they find peace? Where do they have community of support? What gives them hope? And finally, it assists the veteran to make greater use of his, her, their spiritual resources to move towards healing and wholeness, no matter what spiritual beliefs they have. The chaplain is there to evoke those spiritual resources from the individual rather than imposing their own spiritual beliefs on someone else. Next slide. All right, Melissa, I'll turn it over to you and you can talk about collaboration with mental health professionals.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Robin. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you to Nancy for the invitation. And as Nancy said, I am a psychologist and not a chaplain, so I'll be speaking to you from that perspective. I do regularly collaborate and co-facilitate groups with chaplains at the Durham VA. And in my role with VA's Integrative Mental Health Program, I train teams of mental health providers and chaplains to co-facilitate moral injury groups. Unlike Chaplain East and Chaplain Booth, I'm not directly involved in the education or oversight of chaplains. When chaplains come to me for moral injury group facilitation training, I have to work with whatever training, education, and experience they bring. And I can honestly tell you that I've seen a range of knowledge and skills and abilities. There are many chaplains who clearly demonstrate the capacity and the competency to provide the kind of nuanced spiritual care that Chaplain Booth has just been describing. And then there are some whose personal convictions are really front and center in the language they use and the way they conceptualize distress and healing. Now, both of these groups of chaplains, regardless of their education or skill level, will by default provide leadership to their mental health colleagues in the realm of spiritual care. So when I begin training with a new chaplain mental health team, I'm hoping for three things from the chaplain. First, I'm hoping that they're going to model for their mental health colleague how to hold space for diverse religious and spiritual perspectives, as well as holding space for individual differences between people with the same group affiliation or a shared set of practices. Secondly, I'm hoping the chaplain will model how to meet each person in the midst of their religious or spiritual struggles, as well as in uncovering their religious or spiritual resources, and that they can do this without needing to correct doctrine or use sacred texts to explain, justify, or diminish a person's suffering. And third, I hope that the chaplain will model what it looks like to be a companion on a journey. Mental health providers are sometimes perceived as experts in a way that contributes to this us and them mentality, whereas chaplains really lead with their humanity, coming alongside, providing support, and facilitating the exploration and expression of both deep fears and great strengths. So the goal of my portion of the presentation today is to help chaplains in the audience understand where your mental health colleagues, particularly psychologists, might be coming from, both to promote greater understanding across disciplines and also to underscore the importance of leaning into our distinct professional identities to provide truly holistic care. Next slide. So I want to start with an acknowledgement of the relatively unwavering importance of religion in America. This chart presents data from the Pew Research Center. It's the most recent data that I could find, collected in 2007 and 2014. And the question asked about the importance of religion in the lives of American adults. And so as you can see, in both 2007 and 2014, more than half of adults said religion was very important. And more than 3/4 said it was somewhat or very important. You know, in this day and time, we often hear comments about the decline of religion in America. And if we had the 2021 numbers, we would probably see a slight decrease compared to 2014, just as we see from 2007 to 2014. But it's important to keep in mind that we're still talking about the majority of the American public reporting that religion is important to them. Next slide. Just a few more statistics from national surveys done by Gallup. 89% of Americans believe in God. And so this includes both religious and spiritual, but not religious individuals. Also, half of US citizens regularly participate in some sort of organized religious community. And 27% self-identify as spiritual, but not religious. So clearly, religion and spirituality are important to Americans and undoubtedly influence other areas of their lives, such as their health. Mental health professionals are trained to provide care that's attentive to individual differences and aspects of human diversity, things like race, ethnicity, gender, age, sexual orientation, national origin, disability, and religion and spirituality. When I was in graduate school, I took one class on multicultural diversity in which we took a look at several of those big categories that I just listed. And the way we looked at it was to learn about various subgroups that comprise that larger group. You may be having thoughts about that form of education. I would say there is value in learning about the experiences of people on that group level, but that knowledge is no substitute for doing the work of understanding an individual person's lived experience. When my class talked about religion and spirituality, I was frankly a little disheartened by some of the assumptions and judgments I heard from classmates about people who were part of my faith group. It became clear that some of them had attitudes and beliefs about my people, about me, that didn't resonate with my experience. I suspect most of you have had an experience, or maybe many, like this, when you feel misrepresented, misunderstood, and you desperately want to set the record straight, but fear even more judgment or an even greater chasm between people if you do. We must do better than this in our care of persons, particularly when they're sharing some of their most personal beliefs and feelings, as they are when they share their religious or spiritual perspectives. Next slide. So if we think back real quick to the categories of human diversity that I was listing a few minutes ago, religion and spirituality is one of the ones for which we have specially trained care professionals, chaplains. Just to give you a sense, my doctoral training in religious and spiritual diversity consisted of just that one class session in my multicultural diversity class, but I'm actually one of the lucky ones when it comes to psychology graduate training. 75% of psychology training programs don't have any courses in religion and spirituality. And when they surveyed graduate psychology students, they said that within diversity training that they do receive, religion and spirituality was rated as one of the areas receiving the least attention. And that was along with disability and age. And finally, 48% of psychologists describe religion as unimportant in their lives, while only 15% of the general population does. And that mismatch is meaningful. I want you to think for a moment about something that's really important to you. It could be a hobby that you love, a practice that sustains you, a relationship that defines you. Just bring that thing to mind. And now imagine having a conversation with someone who just doesn't get it. That hobby or that practice or that person that's so important to you just doesn't register as important to the person that you're talking to. They might even be suspicious of its importance to you, wondering if that thing is really good for you or if it's actually harming you in some way or contributing to your problems. This is unfortunately the experience that some clients and patients have when seeking care from mental health professionals and chaplains about religious or spiritual concerns. So as the spiritual care authorities, it's imperative that chaplains lead their professional colleagues in acquiring and demonstrating competence in working with individuals with diverse religious and spiritual perspectives. And speaking as a mental health professional, we really need models in the field for how to do this. Next slide. Part of the reason we really need this is because we know that a person's religious and spiritual beliefs and practices are relevant for their mental health care. In particular, research has shown that the following on our slide are related to psychological functioning: participating in organized religion or spiritual practices, religious and spiritual coping with other problems, engagement in personal religious or spiritual practices, and religious or spiritual problems themselves. Most psychotherapy clients report that they would like to be asked about their religious and spiritual beliefs and practices in therapy, and those that do tend to rate the therapy more highly. However, psychologists report discussing these issues in therapy with only 30% of their clients. Now, this may well be because psychologists and other mental health professionals are protecting against their own biases toward religion or spirituality and are seeking first to do no harm. But even if psychologists and other mental health professionals become better trained in religion and spirituality as an aspect of diversity and as a factor affecting treatment, and even if they grow in their comfort and their competence, they're still not, at least in the VA, as Chaplain East said, the designated subject matter experts authorized to provide spiritual care services. As Chaplain East explained, that role belongs to chaplains. Next slide. So I just want to close with a few brief comments about the collaborative moral injury group practices in which I train mental health chaplain teams. We have numerous group modalities for moral injury that all share common core components, and one of them is an inclusive approach to religion and spirituality. We believe that dealing with moral injury often requires exploration of religious, spiritual, or existential aspects of a person's experience. And so we need to promote that exploration in a manner that is appropriate for persons of any religious faith or none simultaneously. We believe that this helps promote the meaning-making process in the context of moral injury. And we do this, and this is going to echo some of what you just heard from Chaplain Booth, through attention to language, and by adopting a posture of curiosity, compassion, and humility, and also by following each person's affect or emotion in order to dive deeper into what resonates for them. Next slide. Just one quick example that helps us do this is an exercise called the spiritual inventory. And so with this exercise, we begin by presenting definitions, some of the same ones that were shared earlier in this presentation. And then we immediately move into open-ended questions, asking, what are your reactions to these definitions? How do you personally identify in terms of religion or spirituality? What gives you the greatest sense of meaning and purpose in your life? What gives you hope? We expect those answers to be tied to religion for some people, and we can create space for that alongside more personal spiritualities that are not connected to a larger orienting system or group. We believe that hearing about other people's deeply personal expressions of religion and spirituality can help all the group members reflect on their own spiritual lives. We are sure to never assert the rightness or superiority of any one perspective, including and especially our own. And in fact, sometimes facilitators come away with a thought-provoking or inspiring nugget for their own personal reflection based on something a group member has said. Something else we've seen is that the mere presence of the chaplain in the room as a co-facilitator of these moral injury groups invites veterans to bring what is sacred to them. I think that's a really weighty responsibility on the chaplain, and it's one that I'm eager to see more and more chaplains step into with the kind of skill and humility that Chaplain Booth and other educators and chiefs like Chaplain East in the VA are seeking to promote. And that concludes the formal presentation. I think we will turn it back over to Nancy.
Had to unmute, sorry. I'm really taken by this, and I'm thinking about not only VA chaplains, but I'm thinking about the implications of what you've shared for military chaplains in an increasingly religiously diverse military context. So I wonder if you could talk together in these last 10 minutes we have before and possibly into the next set of time. What do you see as relating from your specific context of the VA to these increasingly diverse contexts for military chaplains? I'm thinking particularly, Melissa, about the last comments that you made before we move to this shared conversation about how a chaplain can, you might have been referring to a VA chaplain, but I'm thinking about the presence of a chaplain as inviting or a space at least where a person, if they know the inquiry is about what gives them meaning, as opposed to a particular religious belief. Am I on the right track, do you think, for what might be useful in an increasingly diverse military context?
I can speak to it first, but I would very much like to hear, especially what Chaplain East has to say. But I would think so, right? I would think that anytime a chaplain can approach the care of a person with that very open perspective and asking those the broadest questions to help shape their understanding of the person in front of them, that might get them a lot closer to what's really important, rather than even just knowing, what religion a person identifies with, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and specifically for a military chaplain who does not have to keep records or does not have to have files on the person that is sitting before them. Stepping into that, as Melissa alluded to, and creating that space is sometimes difficult for the military chaplain, because the military member is in a different mindset, in a different state of being, in a different season of life. So that's going to look very different for a military chaplain and a VA chaplain. A military service member serving on active duty is so guarded, so protected, so in a mindset of survival for not necessarily just self, but for the military as a whole. That's going to look so much different, and the chaplain themselves are going to create a different space than I would in this hospital environment. Mm-hmm. So what you'll see in the military, from a military chaplain, is the person coming to the chaplain's office, maybe having several visits, but those visits are not as frequent as they would be with a VA chaplain. The environment has a lot to do with it as well. Your military environment is going to be highly anxious. No matter if it's in a war combat zone or on a base, a fort, a post, it's still going to have that energy that is not going to allow the person going to the chaplain to really, really lean into that space that the chaplain is trying to create. So it's very, very difficult. But what they do is they create a space where the service member feel that they can say certain things and it not be documented. They can say certain things in the room and leave it in the room. Things that they don't think about when they leave the room. If I go in there with the chaplain, I'm going to be there, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to leave it there. I'm not going to take it back with me. I'm not going to think about it anymore. And if I don't see the chaplain for a month or two, then that's when I'll pick it back up. So they never really deal with it like we would deal with it in the VA world. So creating that space and stepping into it for both the chaplain and the service member is very, very different. We have to have the same skills. I believe the chaplain needs to have the same skill, the military chaplain, but it just looks different. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I'm going to pursue it a little further because, but let me see, I think Robin may want to jump in. You have to unmute, Robin.
Thank you. I did want to jump in because I was thinking of oftentimes in the military culture creates this atmosphere that may be very different from the culture that an individual came out of, and certainly a religious culture. And so being able to use, the chaplain being able to use their curiosity and helping that individual to explore whatever type of religious stress they may be under due to what they're asked to do in their military service would really open the doors for them to explore their own kind of moral compass and the ways in which they need to live their life out as a part of the military service. Yeah, I'll leave it at that and probably have more to say.
I hope so, but let's go there. I mean, partly there is real difference in the training. Persons come with a degree from one tradition or another from a school, and a lot of the focus in then engaging in military chaplaincy is not about how you talk with someone who comes to see you, but more about military requirements, and as I understand it. So part of what, as I spoke with chaplaincy training colleagues in the three militaries, they were eager because they're aware that increasingly the persons for whom these chaplains care come with spiritual experiences that are more often personal. Let me put it that way. And that might not coincide with the training of the military chaplain as a religious leader in a particular tradition. So what you're describing, I think let's amplify. If you had a chance to meet with a class, a group of persons that are already trained as military chaplains, and they want to talk with you because increasingly the persons who come to see them are not talking about a particular situation in light of an identified faith, but bringing, as you were pointing out, maybe questions of meaning or hope or distress of some kind. How would you help make a transition or a translation even from what y'all's experience, any of the three of you, your experience in the VA or in training VA chaplains?
I can respond to that. If I had the opportunity to talk to a group of military chaplains, I would certainly invite them to um, to be open to other people's experiences and worldviews. I would invite them to make use of their curiosity uh, and to evoke within the person that they're offering care to is looking at what is important to them. What do they value? Um, what what in their life is a focal point in which they want to both live their life out, but also serve their country. Uh, they have joined the military for a reason. And so there must be something really important about military service that they are trying to live out. And it may not be connected to a religion at all. It may be. And so being able to help them, help that individual to explore those places of, okay, what is important to you? How do you deal with your fear when you're under attack? You could be certainly threatened to be under attack all the time. What is it within you that helps you to keep going, keep facing these types of traumas or these types of situations? And what is that? What I would say is that kind of inner belief system that you really hold on to throughout your life.
I have a question from the chat, a couple that I want to share. And the question that comes is, since the VA does not value or require the professional, non-judgmental presence of a board-certified chaplain, educated and trained to spiritually accompany a veteran, how does a military chaplain who is only required to be a religious leader understand their role in the VA? The opposite side, I think. Does that make sense? Do you want to? Robin, you're muted. Go ahead. You're muted, Robin. Sorry.
Yeah.
And Rotunda, were you speaking?
No, I was telling Robin he was muted.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I keep clicking and it doesn't click up. That is a really difficult place for military chaplains who come into the VA, that kind of transition that they have to make. Currently, I have a number of students who are in the military. And to invite them to kind of take off the identity of their own kind of religion and put on this more open understanding of what spirituality may be like, creates some real moral stress within their life. And so they have to figure out ways in which to find a balance between their own religious beliefs and what the VA is trying to get them to do. One of the things I tell students is that, you know, we are here to provide spiritual care. If it involves religion, that's great because it is part of that. But to be with that individual in such a way that there is a connection and they have an experience of this holding space in which they can ask any question. They can express themselves in any way. And I don't have to impose my own religious beliefs upon them. Again, that oftentimes creates some real stress for that individual, especially if they come out of a tradition in which they feel like this is one of the important values that they hold on to is to share their own kind of religious experience and place their own religious resources on others.
I don't know whether you all can see the chat, but I want to mention that there's a retired chaplain indicates that perhaps he's referring to my, or the person is referring to my generalizations, who witnessed chaplains who were military chaplains. I think the person is referring to who were well skilled at creating space and journeying with service members to better understand what gave them hope. Just like VA chaplains possess various skills and competencies, so do military chaplains, absolutely. So the person is acknowledging that increasingly you and military chaplains operate in a pluralistic exploration, a pluralistic setting, and that being willing to explore and be curious is important for both. And certainly the VA values and requires the professional non-judgmental presence. I think part of when I talked with the leaders of the several chaplaincies and military chaplaincies, it was, however, they were interested in our conversation because of the increasing number of persons who don't present from a particular religious tradition. And there may be some military chaplains for whom that would be the more familiar experience. Let's put it that way. But so that's part of why I'm exploring this, because of the increasing number of persons who apparently who are entering the three militaries, and I guess then I presume coming to the VA at some point without a particular tradition, whether that's some form within Christianity or Judaism, for example, or Islam. I'm thinking about also an experience I had with one of a retired military chaplain who served in combat, I believe, in Vietnam. And she talked about the fact that before folks went into combat, so a particular, I suppose, situation they were about to enter, that regardless of religious tradition, everybody wanted to take communion. She was a Christian chaplain. And I think what this chaplain was conveying to me was more what you all are describing about, and I think referenced in these comments in the chat, about even a person for whom Christianity was not a faith they embraced. There was a spirituality in that practice. It wasn't a problem for them to participate in it because it was perhaps for them, some sense of connection with a larger reality. Or you see what a meaning, a ritual practice that connected them with hope about a larger reality, perhaps. I'm just guessing now, but I think that's what this chaplain was trying to say. In that setting, that could be life and death easily for anyone in that moment. There was some reaching for a larger reality. Does that make sense in the kinds of conversations, especially Rotunda and Robin, that you have in the course of a day in a VA setting?
Yes, and let me speak to that, because I glanced at the slide and they said that perhaps these discussions, some of the comments in there are stimulating from the slide that had VA chaplains, and it wasn't versus military chaplain. It had VA chaplains and then it had military chaplains. I believe that in my experience, that the military chaplain is that two sides of the military chaplain as being pastor and chaplain. What you just described in the spiritual sense of being on a battlefield and getting ready to go to war, and everyone coming together, connecting, no matter what faith group you are from, and receiving communion from that chaplain. That is now a chaplain for all.
Right, absolutely, I understand that.
Military chaplain is a chaplain for all, but most often their pastor, you know, in a specific religious group, because they can be, you know, one-on-one with the person. So when I put that up there, I put that up there to not be a versus thing, but to differentiate between the two functions and the environments. We operate on the VA side in a clinical environment. And because of this environment, certain stipulations or certain requirements are expected of us. The military chaplain can operate a little freer than the VA chaplain because they're not in this clinical environment in dealing with all these other aspects of the person.
Mm-hmm.
When a military member goes to that chaplain is pastor, that chaplain is deacon, or that chaplain is the chaplain, you know, and that's it. We function or required to function in a different way. And that's the only reason why I put that up there. When I say religious leader, and that's because a lot of times the military chaplain, they do look at the core of a person, just like Robin put that out. They look at what brought you into the military, what brought you into this environment. And a lot of times they do get at a person being on the margins of society and running away to go into the military. And now it's affecting my ability to integrate into this environment. So yes, the chaplain does get to that.
Mm-hmm.
And the chaplain is the only one that's going to speak to that, because your commander, your first sergeant, and all of them, they're not going to feel free enough to talk to anyone else but the chaplain about that. But that's how the military functions in their environment. And we function in a more clinical environment. Even before we became clinical, we were still in a clinical environment, required to function different. And that is different from a military chaplain. It's no versus. We need to be able to bridge that gap from when they come from serving active duty to the veteran status. So we do look at the same thing. We just do it. It looks different in the two different environments.
Go ahead, Robin. I thought had a sense you'd want to comment.
I'm also aware that military chaplains represent a presence of hope and a presence of peace in a way that oftentimes us who work in the hospital can get there, but don't necessarily have that within our presence, and primarily because of our archetypal role of clergy priests going into a community, being part of that community. They do represent, okay, we are connected to a larger body of individuals. We're connected to something larger than ourselves and larger than this particular experience.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is such a powerful role to play. It puts on a lot of responsibility on the individual.
It does. Yeah.
A large burden, and yet they are there with the military personnel who are struggling with all types of situations and problems that we may not get to within the hospital setting.
Right. I'm also aware that a number of persons who enter the military chaplaincy have one or two brief courses before they're actively engaged in that practice. It could be 2 or 3 years before some of them also take CPE or have a chance at another elective. So depending on the school in which they obtained an MDiv, they may not have had as much readiness to engage with someone for whom spirituality is not shaped in a particular religious tradition familiar to them, and be adjusting then to being a spiritual presence or a hearing as a spiritual leader, apart from a structure that that they entered the military with. That would be very complicated if you really had, because of the number of courses that entering chaplains have to take, and the way that's spread out. You might find yourself in a conversation even a year after you've been in a military chaplain that takes you by surprise. So I do think that you're lifting up that really a chaplain's role might, even in the military, might take on some of the kind of meaning, or how am I going to deal with this, that you also hear in a VA setting. That is less about, I learned this, but now I see this. And I think that's part of what, in my conversations then, that's difficult. And I'm remembering that the book that came out, I think maybe a year and a half ago now, Chaplaincy in the 21st Century, that really talks about the increasing complexity of spiritual experience that chaplains in hospital settings, or in the military, experience in hearing from persons. And that's part of what I think is important, perhaps, about the ways in which VA chaplains and military chaplains could converse with each other. And you're certainly right, Robin, that military chaplains have it, and both of you, Rotunda and Robin, you've represented, these are different jobs. And apparently it gets more challenging as it goes. I'm trying to imagine the challenge of serving in a context, like some would be, knowing that they may be, say they're delivering food in to Gaza, dropping it off, and knowing you're part of that, and that how difficult that context is. So I know I'm rambling a little bit, but I'm trying to lift up that there are places where your work merges and places where it's really different than a military chaplain might engage. I welcome your trying to clarify further what I may have muddled a bit, but and respond to ways in which, I don't know, that your two groups might learn from each other.
So if I understand what you're saying correctly, Nancy, using using your example, if as a military chaplain has a service member in front of them that is delivering food to Gaza, but they're having some reservations because they don't believe in, the war or the religious war that's going on, or whatever the case may be, that chaplain is also a military member. That chaplain took that oath, just like that military member that's standing before them took that oath. So they have a mission to complete. That mission has to go forth. So whatever needs to be said in that room, to get that person where they need to be to go complete that mission. The difference with me, I'm serving that veteran after the fact, after that person is suffering with those wounds and those invisible things that they find it hard to talk about. Now that person is before me. We don't have a mission that we have to accomplish. Don't have something that we have to, at the end of this session, you still got to go back into that environment and you still got to perform that job.
Right.
It's different. And that's what I mean by when a person is in front of a military chaplain with still that mission looming over their heads. It's different from me when that person come and sit with me in the office. That's what I mean by a different environment. And the military chaplain may have it more difficult than we do, because they have to get that person to a place where they can still go perform that mission.
Mhm. Yeah, I think likely it's the tragedy of it that they would be challenged by, which many persons would understand. So in a way, as one person observes in the chat, um, uh, you're listening in a non-judgmental way. So as a military chaplain, and hearing the distress or whatever the situation is that a person is presenting, and none of you is reporting this to somebody else, but so I think part of it is if one, especially early on in a military chaplain's experience, before there's more time for more of the courses that are available, a person speaking to you might be describing as spiritual, an experience that is less familiar to you. Let me try to put it that way. Does that make sense? Or an interpretation. And so learning or being able to appreciate and respond, even if that's a challenge from your own particular tradition, which that might also be the case, that you need to do in a VA setting.
I think that's where I help students to recognize that as a chaplain within our healthcare system, they're the ones that have to do the translation of how that individual is understanding their spirituality. They may not be using the same words that I may use from my tradition. They may be very different words, and yet there may be some real similarities in what they're trying to say. And it's our responsibility as chaplains not to say, no, you have to use our language, but to be able to say, tell me more and help me to understand this more. Mm-hmm. And then I'll do the translation. You know, they may say a humanist who comes and says, you know, I don't believe in the divine, I don't believe in God, but I believe in this, you know, science. And from my perspective, I'm like, whatever you call that, I may call it differently, but I want you to use your language because that's what's important to you. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And to get curious about the language that they are using. I think of learning a new language, and that oftentimes there's a lot of ways of saying the same phrase in a language, that from different parts of a country, they may say it in a different way. That is true for spirituality as well. And individuals may use different phrases for saying some of the very similar things.
What else would you add? We're near the end, and there may be additional things to say to the audience that includes both VA chaplains and military chaplains, I imagine.
I think that I would say that your greatest gift that you have to offer someone is your empathy, your compassion, and your curiosity. If you can combine those three things into your conversation with that person, into your presence with that person, your acceptance of that person is so important. Because
Yes, I think that's the nub of it, I think. I want to share a question that came in, and we have just a few minutes, so I want you to know about it. Could you please speak about ACT or PST modalities, and could you define the abbreviations for people like me in relation to providing care for moral injury?
Melissa, you're up.
And I think that would be a webinar unto itself to get into that with much nuance. To quickly define those acronyms: ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, also known as ACT, and PST, Problem Solving Therapy. Yeah, Emmanuel, I don't want to not do that question justice by trying to do it in 2.5 minutes, but I think it might relate to something I kind of wanted to say, piggybacking on what Robin was just saying, which is, Robin, you were saying that, the best thing that a chaplain can offer is their empathy, is their presence. And I, as a mental health provider, as a psychologist, I just really want to underscore the significance of that, especially in the VA system, which is the one that I know. Everyone, comes at the chaplain pulpit. I'm trying to figure out what's wrong. How are we going to fix what's wrong with you? It's a medical center. And as much as we may strive toward other approaches that are, more person-centered, that are looking at, what matters to you and not what's the matter with you, those sorts of things, I think that's moving in the right direction. But most people still have an agenda for that veteran in terms of what they're hoping the outcome will be. And it's my sense that chaplains are better able to enter that space without an agenda. And that might be different for military chaplains. I was really struck by some of what Rotunda was saying about the influence of that context and the mission and those sorts of things that can potentially complicate, what a chaplain is asked to do in a given situation. But being able to just be present with a person without an agenda, letting them lead, and being, willing to follow and lead from behind in some ways. I just want to affirm that I really see the value of that as a non-chaplain in the VA system. Emmanuel, that didn't really address that comment even indirectly, or that question even indirectly. Rotunda or Robin, do either of you want to try to do that in 2 minutes? I don't.
Particularly to moral injury? Yeah, go for it.
To do in 2 minutes. I think that you define the acronyms and all of that, but there are modalities that most of the providers that I'm aware of, mental health providers, they are very well versed in that, and they will call a chaplain in to address that with moral injury when they see it. Just like Melissa said, we can't enter that space without an agenda. We can collaborate together while they're doing ACT or PST. We can bring the other piece of it to it. So that's why it takes a team to help someone when they're suffering with moral injury.
I think we started a conversation, but without enough time to take it. There's more to say, is what's clear from the very lively and helpful chat, alongside your very informed and helpful conversation. I want to thank those of you who joined and that joined this webinar, and hopefully we'll be able to return to this and keep the conversation going, because it's clear that there are important continuities and substantial differences to amplify in the care for perhaps the same person at different points in that person's life and experience. And I'm glad we've started the conversation, and I really appreciate the gifts that each of you have brought, and the important contributions that those of you in the audience also brought. Thank you very much.